And one of the key aspects of theosophy, or the perennial wisdom, or the ageless wisdom, it goes by many different names, is that the physical body is only one part of what a human being actually is. Our astral body travels to this astral realm, which is essentially, I suppose you could look on it as a kind of processing plant. The astral body, because of all the activities, good and bad, that we've engaged in, and the positive and negative thoughts and words and deeds that we've come out with, there is a purification process. And so we spend a certain amount of time on the astral world, purifying this astral body of ours and getting rid of its pollutants, if you like. And so the amount of time that we spend there depends very much upon the level of a person's spiritual evolution.
I'm here today with Tim Wyatt. Tim is an esoteric author, investigator, journalist, and filmmaker. Tim has been a student of the Ageless Wisdom teachings and a researcher into the mysteries of life and death since the 1960s. Tim, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really honored to have you as my guest.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's always a pleasure to speak about these subjects, and particularly to you. So thank you.
Absolutely. And so my viewers are very interested in near-death experiences. Tell me about yours.
Well, I have been researching near-death experiences for quite a long time, and my own near-death experience is not really like the typical one. Let's just remind ourselves perhaps of what a typical one is. And they often happen in medical settings during operations, and people rise above their bodies. They can see what's going on in the operating theatre. Typically, they might go down a tube or a tunnel, emerge into the light, meet other beings or family members, go on a journey, hear music, see beautiful landscapes, and then they reach a point, usually a barrier, a wall, a stream, a mountain, and they're told by those around them, this is as far as you can go, no further. It's not your time to be here. And the person says, oh, but I like it here. It's great. It's better than Earth. It's better than physical life. No, no, no. It's your time. You must go back. People come back, and they come back absolutely transformed in many cases. And one of the key phenomena which accompany this is that people who previously had a great fear of death emerge from these experiences with little or no fear of it anymore. And often people are transformed. Selfish, greedy people often become altruistic. They start caring about their fellow citizens, because one of the key messages that seems to take place in many of these NDEs, according to my researchers and all those other people who've done it, is the necessity of love, loving other people. And this comes through time and time again. My own near-death experience wasn't quite like that at all. It was more like an out-of-the-body experience, and it happened almost exactly 30 years ago when I was a TV reporter covering the war in Bosnia. And it was a hot August afternoon, and I was traveling with a leading member of the United Nations people in Bosnia, and we had a driver, and we were in a place called the Krajina, which is in northwestern Bosnia, and it's just a small little enclave. And we were held by this militia of young men, armed to the teeth with rifles, and all drinking slivovitz, which is the local brew. And, this alcohol, youth, and firearms is a very, very bad combination. And they kept us there for hours, and we didn't know who they were, because the militias at that time in Bosnia were always changing size, and you didn't know really who was who. There was no law and order. All around were smashed buildings and planes embedded in the sides of walls and all sorts of things. And after about 5 hours, I said to this man waving a gun around, I said, look, I'm going to have to get out of the car and perform one of nature's natural functions. And he said, if you do, I'm going to shoot you. He says, you need to relieve yourself in the car next to this woman from the United Nations. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. And as I got out of the car, it's almost as if my consciousness rose up about 50 feet in the air and I was looking down on the scene below me. And I thought, if this man shoots me, I'm not even going to hear this bullet. I have a 2-year-old daughter back in England. What's going to happen? But all the fear suddenly went, and I found a wall and did what was necessary and walked back to the car. And 5 minutes later, they let us go. Now, I think in a situation like that, I'd been extremely frightened about what these people could do, but the fear just suddenly vanished and I was out of my own consciousness. So if that constitutes a near-death experience, that's the nearest it's come to me. And I know it's not exactly the standard model that many of your colleagues and viewers will have had.
It just proves to me, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but it proves to me that we're not our physical bodies, that we are something else. What do you think about that?
Well, as someone who has been studying these ideas most of my life, I belong to an organization, amongst others, called the Theosophical Society. And the Theosophical Society was set up in 1875, almost 150 years ago, to promote a series of universal ideas and principles which do underpin most science, philosophy, religion, and intellectual thinking. And one of the key aspects of theosophy, or the perennial wisdom, or the ageless wisdom, it goes by many different names, is that the physical body is only one part of what a human being actually is. Theosophy and similar traditions teach that we have 7 bodies or 7 principles: one physical body, an animating energetic principle, which we call the etheric body. We then have an astral body. The astral world is a mirror image of the physical world. Everything physical has its astral counterpart. And the astral world is not unfamiliar to us because it's where we go every night when we dream. And it's said to be a world of desire. And in the Ageless Wisdom tradition, we are taught that when we die, this is the first place we go to. Perhaps we can talk about that a little bit later on. So we have a physical, etheric, astral body, and then we have a mind, which we divide into 2, a lower mind and a higher mind. The lower mind is full of concrete thoughts and everyday activities. The higher mind can conceptualize and philosophize and appreciate beauty. Above that, we have a wisdom intuition principle, which is a way of obtaining knowledge, not via the intellectual mind, but by a higher source. And then at the top of the tree, the 7th principle is pure spirit, because we teach that human beings and all life are just sparks of one life. There is only one life in the universe, and we are all different elements of it. And therefore, this illusion that we have that we're all somehow separate and individual is just that. It's not the truth. It's just a distorted view of reality. So this is how we see it in terms of the Ageless Wisdom tradition. The physical body is just a temporary vehicle for one life. When we forsake it, we move on to other realms. But the important message here is that death isn't final, fatal, or permanent. We're all here again at some time.
Our culture thinks of death as a taboo subject, so we don't really discuss it in depth as we should. And we rely on different religious beliefs to satisfy that everlasting, eternal aspect of ourselves when there's maybe so much more to it than what we've been taught. So you were talking about the astral realm as a place that we go to when we die. Tell me what happens when we die.
Well, when we die, the physical body obviously dies, and exactly how you measure this changes over time. Is it the end of when someone stops breathing, when the heart stops, when activity stops in the brain? It doesn't matter how you work it out. That is the death of the physical form. This energizing principle, the etheric body, which is almost like the wiring system, the invisible wiring system that transmits universal energies into the body. This decays over a period of 24, 36, 48 hours, and its energies just get absorbed. But our astral body travels to this astral realm, which is essentially, I suppose you could look on it as a kind of processing plant. The astral body, because of all the activities, good and bad, that we've engaged in the, the positive and negative thoughts and words and deeds that we've come out with, there is a purification process, and religions talk about this. The Christian religion talks about purgatory, a place where the soul, if you like, is purged. And so we spend a certain amount of time on the astral world, purifying this astral body of ours and getting rid of its pollutants, if you like. And so the amount of time that we spend there depends very much upon the level of a person's spiritual evolution. So somebody who is very spiritually evolved will pass through the astral plane relatively quickly, in hours, days, weeks, or months. Other people might be there for many, many years. Could be many years if there's a lot of purification work to be done. The astral level is also divided into a number of levels, and so people tend to arrive at a level corresponding with their own degree of development. So at the top, in the penthouse suite are all the very, very, evolved people, and at the bottom are the murderers and criminals and, undesirable people. And so when we spent some time in this astral world, and typically it's said that if somebody lives to the age of, say, 75, they will spend the equivalent of, say, a third of their life, 25 years or so, in this particular world. But of course, time doesn't really exist outside the physical level. So we're talking about things which are not necessarily easy to relate to. And then after that is another destination which most religions talk about, which is the heaven world. And this is a purely mental world, and it's so different from the astral world as the astral world is from the physical world. And here we spend time reassessing what we've done on Earth, looking at our skills, our knowledge, our experiences, and distilling this down into its purest form in preparation for a rebirth at some time. Some people who are not spiritually evolved at all probably won't go to this second destination because there's no reason for them to do it. They don't have the higher principles which are necessary to operate on these levels. So that's just a whistle-stop tour of what happens. And then eventually the impulse comes, and our souls, which consist of our higher principles, are reborn in a suitable body, in a suitable location, at a suitable time, to fulfill whatever it is we need to do in the next life. Because I think we all come into life with a mission or a sole purpose of some kind. Many people don't realize this, and people often don't realize it until quite a late stage in their lives. But we all come into this life for a reason, with things to do, with obligations to perform, and with wrongs to be righted in all sorts of different ways.
What happens to those souls that don't make it to that heaven realm?
Well, they tend to get incarnated fairly quickly. It's thought that in wars, particularly in something like the Second World War, when millions of young men from the age of 18 to 25 were killed, many of those would have reincarnated quickly, because it's often said that people who die in violent situations such as wars, or people who are murdered, or people who commit suicide, often tend to reincarnate very quickly, because the soul's urge is to carry on living the physical life, where it can learn far more than it can in the non-physical, non-material realms. So a lot of people will reincarnate quickly, and that's why I am a member of the baby boomer generation from 1945 to 52. In that 7-year period, there was a huge increase in the birth rate in America, in Europe, and other parts of the world as well. So it may be that many of us were involved in these conflicts and wanted to get back into a physical body as quickly as possible so we could resume our journey, I suppose.
Even that's a beautiful thought. It's not one of punishment or painful suffering or anything like that.
Well, that's the problem with religions, particularly Christianity and certain other religions, this idea of punishment and devils and eternal damnation and frying in the flames forever. This is a very bad thing, and it poisons people's lives, and it makes them frightened of death. And one of the reasons I made my new film, which is called The Myth of Death, was to do two things. One, to take the fear out of death, and the other, to put death, physical death of the body, into its proper context. It's just part of another cycle. A tree loses its leaves in the autumn, or as you call it, the fall, and in the spring, it gets its leaves back again. And we see this life cycle going on for very short periods of time, or cycles which last for many thousands of years. And the death of the physical body is just another of those cycles. One of the things which really prompted my interest in this, certainly in recent decades, was the death of my father, who died in 1992. And he was in a hospice, and I lived quite a long way away from him at the time, so I couldn't get in to see him every day. And he died on New Year's Day. And when I went to pick up his things from the hospice a few days later, the nurse who'd been with him told me that he'd been absolutely terrified of dying. And this upset me greatly. It really upset me. And it made me determined to try and do something about that. If nothing else in this life, I'd try and do something to stop people fearing death, because with some people it pollutes their lives. It's just a shadow hanging over them all the time. And if people believe that they have been here before and they're going to be here again, possibly with some of the same people with whom they've been in this life, then I think that puts it into a different kind of context. But of course, with Christianity teaching that, there is a place called hell and there is a devil. And also Christianity is very vague about what happens to people who go to heaven. How long do they stay there? There's no kind of explanation other than vague ones about them being reincarnated on a new earth or doing something beyond that. It's all extremely vague. Whereas the Ageless Wisdom teachings, which underpin Hinduism, Buddhism, many older religions, are quite clear about this, that, the human soul is not here for one life only. Christianity teaches the soul is just here for one life, whether that life lasts for an hour or 100 years. And this clearly doesn't make any logical sense at all, but many people are enslaved by religions or take what they say far, far too literally. And so I think they have become, in some instances, a problem. Clearly, religion offers comfort to many people, and I'm not decrying that. But I think we have to think for ourselves and look at a deeper and more panoramic and more persuasive explanation for why we're here.
When we reincarnate, do we always come back to the same earth realm, or are there other possibilities, other universes that we can visit?
Well, there are many different views on this. My own view is that, yes, it's quite possible for us to incarnate in other worlds. In fact, it may be the case, and we say incarnate, translated from the Latin, it means coming into flesh again. It may be that we have a presence, a non-physical presence on other worlds. Maybe we do physically incarnate in other realms. It's not something that we can be definitive about. And as I say, there are many, many different views about it. There are also ideas which you'll have heard of, and your viewers and listeners will have heard of parallel universes where perhaps me, Tim Wyatt, is doing something at the same time, unaware of the fact that I'm, in another world somewhere, and the two parts of my soul are completely out of communication with each other and unaware of what the other is doing. There are many possibilities. I think the most likely one is that since we are part of this Earth scheme, we're part of this Earth project, I think the likelihood is that we will incarnate on the Earth until we reach a certain point of evolution. Because ultimately, every human being is destined at some point in the far distant future to become a superhuman entity. One of the cliches in the Theosophical Society is that we are gods in the making. We are sparks of the divine. And eventually we'll reach a point where we don't need physical bodies anymore, and we will be pure consciousness and pure spirit. In the Theosophical view of how human beings have developed through a number of development groups, when we first appeared as human beings, far, far longer ago than the evolutionists would admit, we didn't have physical bodies then. We were much more ethereal. And it's said that when we reach subsequent development groups, we're in development group 5 at the moment, about just over halfway through it. When we get into the latter parts of the 6th and 7th development group, we will probably have returned to a situation similar to the way we were during the 1st and 2nd development groups, i.e. having etheric rather than physical bodies. So that means that human beings won't reproduce via sexual means anymore, and all the dating agencies will be out of business. So we will become much more purely conscious beings, but that's a long way in the future. It's not something we really need to worry about right here and now.
Is that something that we're kind of shifting towards? There's a lot of talk about coming into 4D and 5D. Is that what we can expect in a 5-dimensional world?
Well, I think there are clearly other dimensions, and this has been postulated by things like superstring theory and M theory, which postulates the fact there are 11, or in some cases more dimensions, which are all folded into each other. It's not something I know a great deal about. But what I would say is that the important thing here, the most important part of human beings, is consciousness. That's what we are. We're vehicles of consciousness. The vehicle that we have, this physical body with all its demands and the problems it sometimes causes us, is just there for a short period of time. We, as consciously developing entities, and by that I don't just mean intellectual consciousness, but this higher principle of wisdom, intuition, this is what we're aiming towards. And obviously there is a vast spectrum in people's levels of development. And so it will be quite a long time before people do attain these higher levels of consciousness. But there's been much more interest in this stuff over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And consciousness is the big buzzword in science at the moment, people trying to define what it is. And one of the problems you have here is that materialistic scientists want to define consciousness as what they call an epiphenomenon, or a byproduct of the electro and chemical activity in the brain. Their view is that without a physical vehicle, without a brain, there can be no consciousness. We believe the entire opposite of that, that consciousness produces form, form doesn't produce consciousness. And that's quite a radical and controversial point of view for many people. But I do think that certainly during my lifetime, more and more people have been persuaded along these lines to a greater or lesser extent.
I love how science is starting to catch up with spirituality, where we've had spirituality for as long as we've had consciousness on this planet. But science it's been lagging behind a little bit. And like you said, it's now starting to catch up a little bit. Is that what we're seeing in the double slit experiment, where the outcome depends on whether it's being observed or not?
Yeah, well, clearly quantum physics, which has been around for round about 100 years, has really overturned a lot of the certainties which existed in scientific minds before that. Indeed, many scientists still can't get to grips with it. And even people who do say, if you understand quantum, or if you say you understand quantum physics, you're a liar, because no one understands it. And in fact, the famous Albert Einstein described this idea of quantum entanglement, particles that are a great distance apart, communicating with each other in a mysterious way. He called it spooky action at a distance, because he could never, one of the fathers of modern physics, he couldn't get his head around this at all. He couldn't understand it. And indeed, I think many scientists today have that similar problem. But indeed, quantum physics does explain some of the mysteries of the universe and some of the mysteries of consciousness as well. So this is a very, very welcome development. And there are scientists in the world, a growing number, still a painfully small minority, I have to say, who are risking their reputations and often their careers to try and explore these things. In the United States, you have this fantastic organization called the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and they look at things like psi phenomena, telekinesis, moving objects by mind power, clairvoyance, clairaudience, predicting the future, and those kind of things as well. And they have done a vast amount of research in that. But whatever they do, and even the greatest proofs that they furnish, still are not enough to satisfy many scientists. So it's a very difficult job. But there is a hard core of very forward-thinking scientists who are now able increasingly to express these ideas. So it is something whose time has come and will certainly develop in the coming decades, I've no doubt.
You talked about our actual being is like sparks off this one life. Our life is a spark of this one life. Tell me about this one life. What is that?
Well, this is what many people would refer to as God. The supreme being, the architect, the one intelligence, the universal principle. And this is pure spirit, pure consciousness, which, it is said, splits off part of itself, the sparks, so that these sparks can go off and do their own thing, journey and voyage, make mistakes, explore things, and provide experience to the greater part of themselves. So this is why we say there is only actually one life. And although we perceive individual stars and on this planet different creatures, different levels of evolution in the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the mineral kingdom, it is all part of one life. And therefore we say everything is conscious. Now, when you start saying to people who are materialists, well, rocks have consciousness, it starts getting a bit weird then, and they think you're crazy and want to put you in a van and take you to a psychiatric hospital. But rocks are conscious, and rocks are evolving at a much slower rate, I have to say, than human beings. But they do. They have consciousness on their own level. In fact, it would be true to say there is nothing but consciousness in the whole universe that we know about. So it's a realm of pure consciousness, and we are little fragments of that.
It's interesting that you talk about rocks having consciousness and their evolution, in fact, because time as we know it from near-death experiencers, I've learned that time doesn't exist the same way that we think about it on the other side, that it's very subjective, and that would play into the rocks evolving. We don't see their evolution on our time frame.
Yes, exactly. And just while we've just returned to the subject of near-death experiences, in my book, Everyone's Book of the Dead, which is here, there's a really interesting quote from one of the NDE researchers called Dr. Melvin Morse. I don't know whether you've heard of him. He actually studied children. He was a pediatrician, but he says, it doesn't matter who has the experience, the near-death experience, Marines, punk rockers, real estate agents, corporate executives, housewives, ministers or holy men, they're all transformed by their exposure to the light. And, one of the things about this is that these experiences tend to be common to people of different geographical regions of the earth, people of different cultural backgrounds, people of different religions. It doesn't seem to make much difference. It doesn't make much difference, whether you're a man or a woman, young or old, or whatever you are. These experiences have this very profound effect on people. And in fact, some people have had more than one of these experiences, although this is quite unusual. And of course, we live in a time when medical science has sufficiently advanced so that we have more of these, because people are kept alive who in the 1940s and 50s and even 1960s would otherwise have died. And people do come back from these things just recognizing the very potent spiritual value that these things contain.
I do know Dr. Morris. I respect him and I highly regard him. He's been on my podcast a couple times, and he's full of information and wisdom about near-death experiences. Now, do you think near-death experiences are given to some people kind of as a gift for humanity? Are they bringing back something from the other side?
Well, that's a very interesting thought, and I think it could well be the case, because often people do need these lessons in life. They need to find out something in that life, and the way that they find it out is often quite mysterious and quite unexpected. We all have chance encounters with people during our lives, in work situations, on journeys, and amongst friends, and all the other ways that we interact with each other. And it may be that we have to go through some process to meet someone who's going to give us a particular new take on life or some information or whatever. Similarly, it may be the case that people who have these near-death experiences are deliberately granted that insight into who they really are. And I think this is a really important point here. I mean, perhaps the most important point of all is the fact that of all the problems that humanity faces at the moment, and indeed there are many, wars, there's more than 110 wars going on in the world at the moment, would you believe? Pollution, climate change, overpopulation, resource depletion, all kinds of other things that are going on. But I think there is one problem that supersedes all those. And it's basically that humanity is undergoing an identity crisis. Humanity doesn't know who it is. Humanity is engaged in a kind of collective spiritual paralysis at the moment. And this identity crisis is primarily a spiritual one. And the message here is very, very simple. And other people have said it. I can't remember who originally said it, but, we are not people in human bodies with souls attached. We are basically souls who are undergoing a human experience, i.e. a physical experience. But this is not our true identity. This is one part of our identity. And we, in fact, probably spend less time in physical bodies than we do in the hidden realms, the non-material realms, particularly as we evolve as souls and we have more things to do on the inner planes without the necessity of a physical body. And this is why I think it's so tragic often that people will cling on to life almost at any cost. There was a neighbor of mine who died some years ago, and he had cancer, and he was told that if he had a particular operation, it would extend his life by a few days. And he did, because he was so desperate to cling on to life. And indeed, as I say in my film, survival is one of the strongest human instinct that we have and have had, since our development from wherever we came from. And so it's a very, very powerful thing, and it's hard to persuade people that there is something other than being in a physical body. Whereas I think if more and more people understood this and realized it, and I think more and more people slowly are, that we are principally spiritual beings, then, death comes as no fear at all. As John Lennon said, I'm not worried about death at all. It's just like getting out of one car and getting into another. And I think that's an excellent way of describing it.
When you talk about humanity's identity crisis as causing all of these issues on our planet, is there something that's going to click into place and then we're going to be able to fix all these problems?
Well, Tira, I'd very much like to think that there were, but having spent most of my life as a cynical old journalist, I'm not sure that I can come to that point of view. But it may be, it may be that this is not a choice. It may be this is our only means of survival, to realize who we are. Because if we did realize who we are, it would modify people's behavior considerably. It wouldn't do it immediately. You'd still get the wicked, venal, greedy, mean people in the world. But if people realized that what they do in this life is effectively shaping their next life, and just as this life has been shaped by a previous life or lives, then that's something which would be quite revolutionary. And here we introduce another element. And without it, ongoing existence, reincarnation would be impossible. And this is the law of karma, the law of cause and effect. So nothing happens without something causing it. That's why there's no such thing really as luck or accidents or chance. Everything happens for a reason. And our karma, which follows us from life to life, says, okay, you made these mistakes in this last life, so these need to be readjusted. Because karma isn't a form of punishment, it's a form of restoring equilibrium and balance. So it's not there to bash you over the head or to shower you with riches. It might do that in some instances. But it's there to help you to evolve. And if more people realized that everything they do and say and think and feel sends out vibrations and ripples into the world, nothing we do operates in isolation. So if people realize that these things create ripples in space, time, and other dimensions, and that they are all recorded, then people would behave very differently. In fact, one of the things that I omitted to say earlier on is that one of the fundamental aspects when we die, almost immediately after the death of the physical body, is that we engage in a life review, which unfolds over a number of hours, and people see their lives and how they've treated other people. But crucially, the important thing about these experiences is that we see the effects that our actions and our words and even our thoughts have had on other people, the people with whom we've interacted. And this is an important thing because it then makes us, over time, more responsible as people. And we realize that we sometimes have to guard our words and we have to not do something because it's going to give us pleasure, because that pleasure might be causing someone else distress or pain without our necessarily wanting it. But it's a question of just checking and being self-reflective about everything that we do. And that itself is an uplift in consciousness.
When you were talking about parallel universes, it made me kind of think about something that I've heard in near-death experiences. And then just now, when you were talking a little bit earlier about how we spend more time not in these physical bodies, some near-death experiencers say that they come into contact with a higher self, and that higher self is actually them, and it's always on this other side, and it's always conscious, and it's kind of like guiding them, and almost like that this body is kind of like a puppet or a dream or the imagination of the higher self. What's your take on that?
Well, in the theosophical tradition, we refer to these sparks as monads. Monad is a word that was actually originally used by the German philosopher Leibniz. And it means basically a unit, this spark of the divine. It is said that the monad only puts down a part of itself into any one incarnation. It will never put all of itself. And it's a bit like the saying we have, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So it will put a part of itself. What proportion of that is, I have no idea, but I guess it's fairly contingent on what that soul needs to achieve in that particular lifetime. So if you're destined to spend a quiet, contemplative life in a monastery or in a cave in the hills of Tibet, you might not need as much a greater part of that monad as you might if you're going to lead a very, very active life and be a warrior or a statesman or a social reformer or whatever you're going to be. So it is said that some part of that is retained. And I think that would, I've heard this before, and that would explain why people describe meeting themselves on the other side, but a higher version of themselves. Because sometimes I've heard they don't always instantly recognize this higher self because it's so different from their lower selves. And this is true, even here with physical bodies, our lower minds, it's often called the monkey mind because it's just chattering away all the time, going from one thing to another. I want this, I want that, is the boss late? I hate my boss, all this sort of stuff that just goes around all the time. Whereas the higher self is much more panoramic in its view, and it has much loftier ambitions. It can create, it can conceptualize, it can appreciate truth and beauty and noble things, whereas the lower mind is all about feeding desire and wants. And in fact, often in some of these traditions, the lower mind is referred to as the desire mind. In the Hindu tradition, they call it kama manas. Manas is mind. Kama, not to be confused with karma, is desire. So we get the Kama Sutra from the book of Eastern sexual pleasures. So desire is what drives a lot of people for a lot of the time. And some people never make a connection with their higher selves at all, not in this particular life, because there is said to be a connection, like a root between the higher and lower minds and higher selves. And this is sometimes called the rainbow bridge. The Hindus call it the antakarana. And it's once this channel is opened up, this is a kind of evolution and initiation, and enables you to operate much more effectively. People like the psychiatrist Jung would have called it something like, individuation, becoming a more complete person.
That's interesting that you use words like rainbow bridge and higher and lower mind, whereas I've heard heaven is more of a frequency, and I think Tesla talks about frequency and vibration and things like that. What is your feeling about the different levels of existence, or the different frames of mind or consciousness being just different frequencies?
Well, I think there's a great deal to that. I think there's absolutely a great deal to that, because clearly, people have very different levels operating with them at any one time. I mean, Tesla was a remarkable man, and many of the things that he discovered are still kind of secret. I mean, had they discovered Tesla's secrets, we might have free global electricity transmitted through the air and all sorts of other things as well. But clearly, there are within the universe levels and hierarchies. And the problem we have is that we operate in this physical body, and we rely on all our information from 5 physical senses. Hearing, sight, touch, taste, etc. Now, our human eye, as good as we think it is, it's nowhere as good as an eagle's eye. And in fact, the human eye can only see less than 1% of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Some flowers have a better sense of smell than we do. Some creatures have a much better facility for hearing, and yet we rely on these physical senses. We say, don't we, seeing is believing. If we don't see it, if we can't touch it, if we can't put it into an atom smasher or crush it up in a test tube and test it in that way, it doesn't really exist for us. And this is the problem. this is the problem with the materialistic paradigm, because it states that everything has to have a physical cause. Whereas we know that there are much more, as we spoke about earlier on, there are much more refined grades within each and every one of us. And they are there for us to find. Many people, assume always that the wisdom and the knowledge and the insight all lies out there. Well, it doesn't. Most of it lies within us, and we can reach that and access that if we're prepared to put in the effort and if we have suitable techniques to do that. If we are able to meditate or get into other deeply introspective states, it's amazing what we can discover about these higher realms. And what you say about vibration is very interesting, because there is a universal law of vibration. Everything does have its own fingerprint, its own frequency, which is unique to it, whether it's a chemical element or whether it's a sound or whether it's a planet, they all have their own particular identities along these lines. But our knowledge of these things is very limited. And even with the best telescopes in the world, so that we're able to peer into the far distant universe, and even with microscopes, which can go down to individual particles and beyond that, we're still only seeing a tiny fragment of what there is. And I guess it's only when we are freed from the shackles of the human body and get into these higher realms that we then have the ability to start to see other things.
If my viewers wanted to reach out to you, how can they find you, Tim?
Well, I have a Facebook page, Tim Wyatt, Esoteric author. I can be contacted if you want to buy my books. You can go onto my book site, which is firewheelbooks.co.uk, where you can buy this book, Everyone's Book of the Dead, and my other book, which outlines the basic ideas of the Ageless Wisdom tradition, called Secrets of Infinity. So those are the two easy ways to contact me, or perhaps via yourself.
Tell me about your film.
Well, the film has been supported by a very interesting organization called the Blavatsky Trust. Uh, Madame Blavatsky was one of the founders of the Theosophical Society in 1875, and she was a marvelous woman that most people have never heard of. And she traveled the world, went to the East, America, Africa, parts of Central Asia, and she met all sorts of people, initiates, wise people, and eventually she wrote this amazing book called The Secret Doctrine. And this is the basis of Theosophy. Anyway, the Blavatsky Trust is there to promote her work and her name, and they agreed with me that it was necessary to do a film to explain in simple and non-technical terms what happens to people when they die. Because if you're going to go on a journey, it's always useful to have a roadmap or a few pictures of the place that you're going to, or some idea of the kind of town or city or landscape that you're visiting. So this film is kind of like a route map, but it's also there to really reassure people, particularly people who have been bereaved. And I've had quite a bit of experience dealing with people who are bereaved, because I have in the past, and maybe doing again in the future, conducting non-religious funerals for people, at which I very much try to reassure them that things will be okay. So it's to put death into its proper context, this film, The Myth of Death, and it's to take the extreme fear out of it and to establish where we are. Life is a continuum in and out of physical bodies. Some lives are long and short. Some lives are prosperous. Some are miserable. Some are painful. Some are depressing. Some are enlightening. But where we go, we are authors of our own destiny. We rise and fall through our own efforts. There's no one there to say what's right or wrong. We have to ultimately know this for ourselves. And we only do that by repeated failures accompanied by the occasional success. And this is how we learn and grow. So I hope the film will even persuade people of a materialistic persuasion, of which they form the majority of humanity at the moment. I hope it will persuade them not to be fearful of death, and to try and look on it in another way, and to try and think about it originally. But I do suspect now that attitudes are beginning to change. And as we know, in my lifetime, so many different things that were taboo back in the 1950s when I was born are now quite accepted. So things can change, and people's perspectives can also change. In my country, in England, it's not a particularly religious country anymore, certainly not a Christian country. Whereas your country, the United States, I think more people still subscribe to various Christian denominations. And so this is going to provide an additional thing to take into consideration, but it will change. In fact, I was just recently reading some research by the well-respected Pew Research Institute, who do attitude surveys into all sorts of things. And they did one, I think, in 2022, asking people about reincarnation. And interesting, a lot of Christian people, particularly Hispanic Catholics, about 35–40% of them believe in reincarnation. Whereas the more austere Calvinist Protestant ones, only about 1 in 10, Methodists and people like that, only about 1 in 10 of them believe it. But quite a few other people from other sorts of religious Christian sects also believe in reincarnation. And surprisingly, one of the surprising things about this survey was that many agnostics and even atheists still believe in reincarnation. So that's a pretty unusual finding. So yes, I guess attitudes to all this are beginning to change, and I think will continue to change.
And if you had one message to leave with the viewers from our conversation today, what would that be?
Mind what you say and what you do and what you feel, because it will all catch up with you eventually.
Very wise words. Thank you so much, Tim, for being my guest. This has been a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, Tia, and it's been wonderful to speak to you and to your viewers. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near-death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.